The soft sound of the doorbell echoed through the empty house. Mira stood frozen on the porch, her fingers trembling as she gripped the small white envelope in her hand. The air was thick with a mixture of nostalgia and guilt. And for a moment, she couldn't bring herself to knock. She had left everything behind 3 weeks ago, her job, her place in his world, and most painfully, him. But now, she was back, and there was something she needed to say. The door swung open, and there he stood. Ethan Hargrave, the billionaire whose life she had upended. His sharp eyes scanned her face, lingering just long enough for the weight of the past 3 weeks to settle between them. The unspoken question lingered in the air. Why was she here? Mira opened her mouth to speak, but her voice betrayed her. Instead, she handed him the envelope, the small pregnancy test clearly visible inside. "I'm pregnant," she whispered. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now, back to the story. 3 weeks ago, Mira had been a different person. A woman of quiet routines, working tirelessly in the sprawling estate of Ethan Hargrave. The mansion was breathtaking, towering high above the city's skyline, a symbol of power, wealth, and influence. It was a place she never belonged, but one she had to enter to survive. She had been hired as his maid. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work, and that was all she needed. At least, that's what she told herself every morning as she slipped on her uniform and went about her duties. Ethan Hargrave, the elusive billionaire, rarely left his office or his home. The few times he did, she was little more than a shadow, cleaning his space and avoiding his penetrating gaze. But then there was that one evening, the night everything changed. It started innocently enough. Mira had finished her chores for the evening and was about to head to her small quarters in the back of the house when she heard the soft strumming of a guitar. She hadn't known Ethan played, but the sound was hauntingly beautiful. She walked toward the source, drawn in by the music, and found him sitting by the fireplace, his fingers dancing across the strings. "You play?" she asked before she could stop herself, a rare moment of curiosity breaking through her usual reserve. Ethan looked up, his piercing blue eyes meeting hers for the first time in a way that wasn't dismissive or cold. "Sometimes," he replied with a quiet smile. And for the first time, Mira felt something shift in the air between them. It was like he was a man, not a billionaire. Like he was someone who had a life beyond the wealth and expectations that followed him wherever he went. They talked for hours about music, books, and their lives before the mansion. For a brief moment, Mira forgot the lines that separated them. But when Ethan reached out to touch her hand, that line was never clearer. "What are you doing here, Mira?" he asked softly, his voice low. I'm just trying to get through the day." She didn't know why she said it, but somehow, the words felt like the truth. It had been a quiet night, and for the first time, Mira let herself breathe a little easier in his presence. But everything shifted the moment Ethan stood, his hands suddenly gripping her waist, pulling her close. His lips found hers before she could protest, and her heart slammed in her chest. She hadn't expected this, hadn't anticipated the intensity of his kiss, but it was undeniable. The night was a blur of emotions, heat, and want. Mira had told herself to leave, to walk away. But something held her there. Something in his touch, in his eyes, in the way he whispered her name like a prayer. And before she knew it, she was lost. in the luxury of his arms and the warmth of his bed. But as dawn broke and reality set in, she slipped away. She left without a word, without a note, disappearing into the early morning light. The next few days were filled with awkward tension. Mira avoided Ethan, keeping her distance as if nothing had happened. She buried herself in her work, focusing on her chores, trying to forget the passionate night that had changed everything. But Ethan wasn't about to let it go so easily. His eyes followed her around the mansion, his voice low and almost unreadable whenever they spoke. He tried to engage her in conversation, but she always deflected, always moved away. Yet, despite her efforts to keep things professional, there were moments. Small, fleeting moments when their gazes would meet, and the heat from that night would ignite again. But Mira couldn't let it happen. She couldn't allow herself to be part of his world. She wasn't that kind of woman. She had to leave. One night, after another tense interaction, she packed her things in silence. She left without saying goodbye. No explanation, no forwarding address. She simply vanished into the night, hoping the pain of what had happened would fade. But it never did. Days turned into weeks, and Mira thought she could forget. She thought she could go back to the life she had before Ethan Hargrave had disrupted it. But there was one thing she hadn't anticipated: the little secret growing inside of her. A pregnancy test. Mira had stared at it in disbelief that morning. Her hands shook as she held the tiny plastic stick, the pink line staring back at her like a cruel reminder of what had happened. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready for a child. And she certainly wasn't ready to face Ethan. But as the days passed and the reality of her situation set in, she knew she had to go back. She had to tell him. There was no other choice. She had to confront the man she had run from. And so, she stood at his doorstep now, holding the pregnancy test that would change everything. What would you do if you were in Mira's shoes? Would you face the consequences of a past mistake? Or would you try to forget and move on? Do you think Mira made the right choice in returning? Let me know in the comments. Mira stood there, the cold air nipping at her skin, her heart racing with every second that passed. Ethan still hadn't spoken, still hadn't taken the envelope from her hand. The seconds stretched into minutes, and the silence between them seemed louder than anything she'd ever heard. His eyes, once so distant, now held a look that Mira couldn't quite read. There was something calculating in his gaze, something sharp. His jaw clenched, and his gaze dropped to the envelope she was holding. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and took it from her hands. She could feel her palms grow clammy, her throat tight as he opened it. His eyes scanned the pregnancy test inside, his expression unreadable. Mira's breath caught in her throat, and she forced herself to meet his eyes, though every part of her wanted to run. "You're pregnant?" he asked, his voice low and heavy with something Mira couldn't quite decipher. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know it's a lot. I didn't know who else to turn to." Ethan's gaze softened, just for a moment, before the walls he'd carefully built around himself slammed back into place. He stepped back slightly, as if the news was a physical blow he needed to absorb. I don't know what to say," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. You left without a word." Mira felt a pang of guilt at the truth in his words. She had left without explanation, without any thought of how he might feel. But at the time, it had felt like the only way to protect herself from what had happened. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought I was making the right choice." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Ethan's eyes flickered over her, lingering on her face, as if trying to decipher the truth of her actions. Mira wasn't sure if he was more confused, angry, or hurt. But whatever it was, it felt like he was a million miles away from her. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" he asked, his voice quieter now, yet still edged with a hint of frustration. I couldn't," she stammered, the words tumbling out as she tried to explain. "I was scared. I thought you'd hate me for it. I didn't want to trap you into something you didn't want." Ethan's lips parted, but no words came out at first. He looked at the ground, running a hand through his hair in frustration. The man who was used to control, used to managing everything in his life, now found himself helpless. "You don't have to do this alone," he said, finally looking back up at her. His voice had softened, but the uncertainty still lingered in his eyes. "I'm not going to ignore it. I don't know what comes next, but I'll figure this out. We'll figure this out." Mira swallowed hard, trying to calm the storm in her chest. "I don't expect anything from you. I wanted you to know." The weight of the moment hung heavy between them. Neither of them knew what to do next, how to move forward with something so complicated. The pregnancy wasn't just an announcement. It was a challenge to everything they thought they knew about each other, about their lives. But Ethan did something unexpected. He reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands, his touch tentative, like he was unsure if it was okay to be so close again. Mira's heart skipped a beat as his thumb lightly traced the curve of her cheek. For a moment, the entire world seemed to disappear, and it was just the two of them standing there, suspended in a fragile moment. "I'm sorry for what happened," he whispered, his breath warm against her skin. "But we're going to get through this. Together. If you'll let me." Mira's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this. After everything, she thought he would be angry, maybe even furious. But instead, there was only a quiet promise in his words, a promise that terrified her more than anything else. As Mira stepped back and turned to leave, Ethan called after her. "Wait, Mira." She paused, heart racing, unsure of what she expected him to say. He had already said so much, but there was something else. Something she needed to know. He stood there, hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. "I don't want to make this harder for you. If you want to leave, I won't stop you. But I'm here, and I won't let you face this alone." Mira's mind was spinning, her heart at war with itself. She hadn't expected this, any of it, the tenderness in his voice, the promise of support. It was everything she didn't know she needed, and everything she feared. But as she turned to face him one last time, she made a decision. She wasn't going to run this time. She wasn't going to face this alone. The days that followed Mira's return to Ethan's mansion were filled with uneasy silence. The promise he had made to be there for her lingered in the air, but it wasn't enough to erase the tension between them. Mira found herself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. She had never expected to return to him. Yet here she was, living under the same roof again, under even more complicated circumstances. Every morning she would see Ethan from a distance, his tailored suits, the weight of his responsibilities evident in the lines of his face. But his eyes were different. They were softer when they met hers, as though he saw her now in a way he hadn't before. Still, there was a distance, a wall between them. As much as she tried to bridge that gap, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. They rarely spoke unless it was necessary. His efforts to be kind and supportive were apparent, but it felt like they were strangers, navigating through the same space yet unable to truly connect. One evening, after a long day of cleaning and organizing the vast estate, Mira walked into the kitchen to find Ethan standing at the counter, holding a glass of scotch. His eyes were pensive, and when he turned to see her, his lips curved into something resembling a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Did you sleep okay?" he asked, his voice casual, almost too casual. Mira nodded, though her mind was elsewhere. "Yeah, just fine." There was an awkward pause. She could tell that Ethan wanted to ask something more, but neither of them was ready to cross that line. The pregnancy loomed between them like an invisible wall that neither of them had the words to break down. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked quietly, finally breaking the silence. His gaze was intense, searching hers. Mira was taken aback by the question. She hadn't expected it. "Regret what?" she asked, her heart skipping a beat. "Us," he said simply, his voice so calm it was almost eerie. "I know you left because you thought it was a mistake. But I need to know if you regret it. If you regret everything that happened." The question hung in the air like an anchor, pulling her down into a storm of confusion. She had spent weeks trying to push her feelings aside, trying to convince herself that the night they had shared was nothing more than a fleeting moment. But standing there, in his presence, with that question on the table, she realized how deeply it had affected her, how much she had wanted it to be something more. "I don't know," she said honestly, looking down at the counter. "I don't know what I feel, Ethan." His hand tightened around the glass, but his eyes softened. "We need to figure this out, Mira. For the sake of the baby. For both of us." Mira nodded, though the words felt hollow in her throat. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that this could work. But there was still so much fear in her heart. Fear of the unknown, fear of what would happen once the child arrived, and most of all, fear of Ethan's true feelings. Over the next few days, Ethan made an effort to show her that he wasn't going anywhere. He attended doctor's appointments with her, walking beside her in a way that felt both comforting and strange. But there was something else. Something Mira couldn't shake. There were moments when she caught him staring at her, like he was studying her every move, searching for something she couldn't understand. One evening, she found him in his study, going through papers, his brow furrowed in concentration. Mira hesitated at the doorway, unsure of whether to interrupt. It was the middle of the night, and she had been trying to avoid him all day, not out of malice, but because something was weighing heavily on her mind. "Can we talk?" she asked softly, stepping into the room. Ethan looked up, surprised to see her standing there. He motioned for her to sit. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Mira hesitated, then took a seat across from him. "There's something I need to ask you, and I need you to be honest with me." His expression shifted, though he remained composed. "You know you can ask me anything." Mira took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Why did you really hire me as your maid?" she asked, her voice quiet but insistent. Ethan froze for a moment, the calm exterior faltering ever so slightly. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving hers. "What do you mean?" he asked, though Mira could see the tension in his jaw. "You know exactly what I mean," she replied, her voice growing stronger. "There are plenty of maids out there. So why me, Ethan? Why was I chosen for this job? Why was I the one who ended up in your life?" His eyes hardened, and for the first time since she had come back, Mira saw a glimpse of something unfamiliar, something almost calculating in his gaze. He didn't answer her right away, but his silence spoke volumes. "I think you should leave this question alone," he said, his tone darker than before. But Mira wasn't ready to let it go. "No," she said firmly, standing up now. "I need to know the truth. What are you hiding?" Ethan's eyes narrowed, his posture stiffening. "You don't want to know, Mira," he said, his voice low. "Trust me." But Mira couldn't. She couldn't trust him completely. Not yet. And something inside her told her that the truth was much darker than she could ever imagine. The days following Mira's confrontation with Ethan had been filled with tension. The mansion, which had once seemed so vast and welcoming, now felt cold, empty, as if every room held a secret. Mira couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that Ethan knew more than he was letting on. She had asked the question, "Why me?" And yet, she still didn't have the answers she desperately needed. For the first time in her life, Mira found herself questioning everything she thought she knew. What had she gotten herself into? What had she overlooked during the time she spent in Ethan's mansion? One evening, after a particularly quiet dinner, Mira found herself wandering the mansion's enormous hallways. The silence was oppressive, like the house was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. It was then she stumbled upon a room she hadn't noticed before. An old dusty door tucked behind a heavy velvet curtain. The door was slightly ajar, and Mira's curiosity got the best of her. She pushed it open, the hinges creaking in protest, revealing a dimly lit library, shelves filled with old books, and an enormous desk cluttered with papers. But what caught her eye wasn't the books or the desk. It was the large, framed photograph resting on the desk. Mira's heart skipped a beat as she stepped closer, her breath catching in her throat. The photo was old, taken many years ago. It showed Ethan, much younger, with a woman beside him. A woman who looked so much like Mira, it took her a moment to register what she was seeing. It was his mother. Or so it seemed at first. But then Mira looked closer and realized that the woman in the photograph was, without a doubt, her. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps as the room seemed to spin around her. How could this be possible? Ethan's mother, a woman she had never met, had strikingly similar features to her. Dark eyes, the same curve of her lips, and even the same shape of her jaw. But that wasn't the most unsettling part. The photograph was dated, 15 years ago. The realization hit Mira like a punch to the gut. The woman in the photo wasn't just a stranger. She was someone Mira should have known. She was her mother. Mira staggered backward, her mind racing. She had never known her mother, not really. She had grown up in foster care, bouncing from one home to the next, never really settling anywhere. The name Mira had always been a mystery, a name her mother had left behind. She had always been told that her mother had disappeared when she was young, leaving her without a trace. But now it all made sense. Mira stood frozen in the middle of the room, staring at the photo as if the image could offer her some kind of answer. Why had Ethan never told her? Why had he kept this from her? Before she could gather her thoughts, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. She turned, panic rising in her chest. She quickly shoved the photograph back into place and made her way toward the door, her heart pounding in her chest. "Caught you sneaking around again," Ethan's voice called out, breaking the silence. Mira froze. She couldn't turn around, couldn't face him now. Not after everything she had just discovered. "You always find a way to get into places you shouldn't be," Ethan continued, his footsteps drawing closer. "What are you looking for, Mira?" Mira slowly turned around to face him, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ethan's expression faltered, his eyes narrowing as if he had been expecting this moment. "I didn't think you were ready to know. I didn't want to hurt you." But Mira wasn't listening. She was too caught up in the shock of what she had uncovered. "You knew, all along, about my mother, about who I am, and you never said a word." Ethan took a step forward, his eyes softening with regret. "It wasn't the right time, Mira. There's so much you don't understand." "No," she snapped, her voice trembling with emotion. "You don't get it. All my life I've been searching for answers, for something to hold on to. And now I find out that you knew all along, and you kept it from me." Ethan's gaze hardened, and for a moment, Mira thought he might say something to justify himself. But instead, he just stood there, his expression unreadable. He had already made his choice. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said quietly, his voice laced with regret. Mira's anger and confusion exploded in a way she hadn't expected. "You did, Ethan. You hurt me in ways you'll never understand." She turned and fled the room, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know where she was going, but she couldn't stay there. Couldn't stand to be near him anymore. As she rushed down the hallway, she couldn't help but think of everything she had been through to get to this point. All the years of not knowing, of feeling abandoned and alone. And now this. The truth had come crashing down on her, and she wasn't sure if she could trust anything anymore. Mira didn't know how long she walked, but by the time she returned to her room, she was exhausted, emotionally drained. She slammed the door behind her and sank down onto the bed, trying to catch her breath. Her mind raced with 100 questions, but one stood out above all the rest. Why had Ethan kept the truth from her? It was clear that he had known the connection between them all along. But what was his real reason for hiring her? What had he wanted from her? What had he expected to happen? Before she could think further, the door opened behind her. "Mira." Ethan's voice was soft, almost pleading. "Please, let me explain." But Mira wasn't ready for more explanations. Not now. Not after everything she had learned. "I need time, Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking. And with that, she closed her eyes and let the tears fall, no longer able to hold them back. The days that followed Mira's discovery felt like a blur of confusion and anguish. The mansion, once a place she had thought of as a sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage, imposing and cold. Ethan had continued to make attempts to speak to her, to explain himself. But Mira wasn't ready to hear him. Every time she saw him, her heart ached with the weight of everything he had hidden from her. The lies, the secrets, the way he had manipulated her life without her knowing. She had trusted him. She had trusted him in ways she never thought possible. And now, every ounce of that trust had been shattered. Mira spent her days in a haze, her emotions swinging between fury and heartbreak. She couldn't be in the same room as Ethan without feeling the sting of betrayal. Every word he said only seemed to deepen the wound. Every touch, every lingering look was a reminder of the life she had never asked for, of the web of lies that had ensnared her. But even in the midst of her pain, one thought kept resurfacing, like an insistent whisper in her mind. What was the truth behind all of this? It was that question, the need for answers, that led Mira to do something she had been avoiding for days. She finally opened the file that Ethan had been hiding, the one she had found hidden in the study. Inside there were records, documents and letters, all carefully cataloged. As Mira flipped through them, her stomach sank. These weren't just papers about her mother. They were about her. They detailed everything: her birth, the circumstances surrounding her mother's disappearance, even the custody battles that had torn apart her early years. But it was the final letter that hit her like a punch to the gut. It was from her mother. The words were scrawled hastily, as if written in a moment of panic. "I'm sorry, Mira. I never wanted you to be a pawn in his game. I had to leave to protect you. Ethan is not who he appears to be. He's dangerous. You must stay away from him. Please, trust no one but yourself. The truth will come for you when the time is right." The letter had no signature, no indication of when it was written, but it was enough to send Mira reeling. Her hands shook as she read the words over and over again, trying to make sense of them. Ethan is dangerous. Mira didn't know what to believe anymore. Could it be true? Had her mother known about Ethan all along? Had Ethan been part of her mother's disappearance? Her mind raced, but the more she thought about it, the more she felt like she was losing control. The truth was slipping further from her grasp, and she didn't know how to pull it back in. Mira's mind wasn't the only thing spiraling out of control. Ethan, too, seemed to be crumbling under the weight of their unspoken words. He had tried to make amends, to explain himself. But every time Mira pushed him away, every time her eyes filled with distrust, a part of him shattered. He had never intended to hurt her. All he had wanted was to protect her. But now, standing on the edge of this emotional precipice, he realized he had done just the opposite. He knew she had found the letter. He knew she had read the truth. And now, all he could do was wait for the inevitable confrontation. He couldn't hide from her anymore. It was that night that everything came crashing down. Mira was alone in her room, staring at the letter, when a soft knock on her door broke through her thoughts. She didn't even have to ask who it was. She already knew. "Mira, we need to talk." Ethan's voice was low, strained. She didn't respond. She couldn't. The thought of seeing him again, of hearing his voice, made her sick. But Ethan was persistent. He pushed the door open, stepping into the room, his eyes filled with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly. "We're not done here." Mira didn't look up. She couldn't bear to see him. Not after everything he had kept from her, not after everything he had taken away. "Why?" she asked, her voice raw with emotion. "Why did you keep all of this from me? Why didn't you tell me the truth?" Ethan stood there, his hands clenched at his sides, as if fighting the urge to break down. "I didn't want you to hate me," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I didn't want you to run away from me." Mira shook her head, the tears coming harder now. "I didn't run away from you, Ethan. I ran from the lies, from everything you made me believe about myself. And now I don't even know who I am anymore. My mother was right, wasn't she? You're dangerous." Ethan's eyes widened in shock, as if the words had struck him like a blow. "Mira, He stopped, his voice faltering. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted you to find out this way." "Then why did you let it happen? Why did you bring me into this world of deceit?" Mira's voice was trembling, her anger rising like a storm inside her. Ethan took a step toward her, but Mira held up her hand to stop him. "Don't. Just don't. I don't want to hear your excuses. I just want answers." There was a long silence between them, the weight of their emotions pressing down on them both. Ethan's shoulders sagged, and he finally nodded. "I'll tell you everything. I'll tell you why I kept the truth from you." But before he could continue, Mira turned away, her heart too heavy to carry on with the conversation. She couldn't do this anymore. She couldn't keep fighting for the truth when the man she loved had already betrayed her in the worst way possible. "I don't want to hear it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't want to hear your lies anymore, Ethan. I need to be alone." The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Mira collapsed onto the bed, burying her face in the pillow, her body racked with sobs. She felt utterly, completely lost. She had trusted him. She had believed in him. And now, all of that had been ripped away. Ethan's words, the ones he had tried so desperately to make her believe, echoed in her mind. But they no longer held any meaning. The walls she had built around herself, the ones she had so carefully constructed to protect her heart, were gone. And now, all she had was the truth. The weight of everything seemed to press down on Mira in the days after Ethan had left her alone in her room. She had spent countless hours staring out the window, her mind racing, her heart torn in 1,000 different directions. The mansion, which had once felt so grand and full of possibilities, now felt suffocating. The silence that surrounded her was deafening. But it wasn't just the silence of the house that troubled her. It was the silence within herself. Mira had spent so long believing that if she just kept going, just kept putting one foot in front of the other, she could survive. She had survived foster homes, abandonment, isolation, and now she had to survive this. But what if surviving wasn't enough? What if it was time to finally live? As she sat by the window, the sun setting behind the hills, she found herself asking the question that had been buried deep inside her. What do I want? It wasn't the first time she had asked herself that. But this time it felt different. This time the question wasn't about survival. It wasn't about whether she could keep going despite everything that had happened. This time it was about her future, about what she wanted, who she wanted to be. Mira's fingers traced the edge of the glass, the coolness of it grounding her. The world outside was changing, the sky painted with the colors of the evening, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she took a deep breath. She could feel the pull of the past, the hurt, the betrayal, the secrets. But there was something else too. Something new. Something that was beginning to flicker inside her. It was a sense of clarity, a quiet but certain realization. She didn't need to be anyone else's pawn. She had lived so much of her life trying to figure out where she fit. First with the families that had taken her in, then with Ethan, and even now with the pregnancy looming over her future. But maybe it was time to stop trying to fit into someone else's narrative. She was her own person, and that was enough. The next morning, after a restless night of pacing and thinking, Mira made a decision. She couldn't stay in the mansion anymore, not with the weight of all the questions still hanging in the air. Not with the constant reminder of Ethan's betrayal, no matter how much he claimed to want to make it right. She had to go. She had to find herself, even if that meant stepping away from the man she had once trusted with her heart. As Mira packed her few belongings, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of sadness. Part of her still loved Ethan. Part of her still wanted to believe that they could work through the pain, that maybe they could have something more. But the truth was, she wasn't sure if she could ever trust him again. Not after everything he had kept hidden. not after the things she had learned about her own past. But at the same time, there was a sense of freedom. Mira didn't need to stay and wait for Ethan's promises. She didn't need him to fix everything. She could do it herself. As she zipped up her suitcase, the door creaked open behind her. Ethan stood there, his eyes heavy with regret, his face drawn and tired. "Mira," he whispered, almost hesitantly, "I don't want you to leave. Please let me explain everything." She stood up straight, her back to him, her heart pounding. "I don't need you to explain anymore, Ethan. I need to do this on my own. I need to find myself, away from all the lies and secrets. I can't keep doing this." Ethan's voice cracked, a quiet desperation creeping into his words. "Mira, please. I made a mistake. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted you to feel like you didn't matter." "You didn't just hurt me, Ethan," she said, her voice steady but raw. "You took away my chance to know who I am. You kept me in the dark, and I can't live like that anymore." She turned around slowly, her gaze steady as she met his eyes. "You don't get to define me, Ethan. I'm done being part of your game." Ethan stepped forward, his hands outstretched as though to reach for her. But Mira took a step back, shaking her head. "I'm not the same woman I was when I first walked into this house," she said quietly. "I came here thinking you could save me. But what I've realized is that I'm the one who has to save myself." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan looked like he wanted to say something, to beg her to stay. But he remained silent. And for the first time, Mira didn't feel like she needed him to fix everything. She had already started fixing herself. With one final glance at Ethan, Mira picked up her suitcase and walked out of the room. She didn't look back. Mira found herself outside the mansion, standing in front of the grand gates, the weight of her decision settling over her like a heavy cloak. She wasn't sure where she was going or what her future would hold. But for the first time, she felt a sense of peace. She had done the hardest thing she'd ever done. She had walked away from the man she had once thought would be her everything. And in doing so, she had taken the first step toward reclaiming her life. The road ahead was uncertain. The future was full of unanswered questions. But one thing was clear. Mira was no longer lost. She was finding her way. Mira had done it. She had walked away. But the decision wasn't as simple as it seemed. For the first few days, she tried to live with the sense of freedom she had gained. She found a small apartment in the city, rented it with the little savings she had, and focused on herself, on the life she had almost forgotten was hers to live. Yet, even in the solitude of her new home, there was still a part of her that couldn't shake Ethan. The man who had been a part of her life, the man who had torn her heart apart with lies and deceit, was still in her mind. But Mira knew that she couldn't let him win. Couldn't let him pull her back into his world. She had made the choice to leave, and she was determined to stick to it. But Ethan wasn't the type to let things go, not this easily. It was a week later, in the middle of a quiet afternoon, when Mira received the message. It was simple. No words. Just an address. "Come. We need to talk." Mira's heart skipped a beat when she saw the message on her phone. She knew that address. It was Ethan's private office in the heart of the city. The one place that had always been off limits to her. Where his world truly existed, hidden behind glass walls and guarded doors. She didn't know why. But something in her told her that this meeting was inevitable. She couldn't hide forever. With a deep breath, Mira grabbed her jacket. her fingers trembling as she slid it on. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she couldn't stay away anymore. She had to face him one last time. The office was sleek and modern. Everything about it screamed power. There was a glass desk surrounded by bookshelves filled with leather-bound tomes, awards, and papers. The view of the city from here was stunning, but Mira didn't care about any of that. All she could see was Ethan, standing by the window, his back to her, looking out at the skyline. For a moment, the silence between them felt suffocating. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Ethan said, his voice low. He didn't turn to face her, but she could feel his presence in every corner of the room. "I didn't want to," Mira replied, her voice calm but resolute. "But you had to know I would. You don't give up so easily." Ethan's shoulders tensed, and when he finally turned to face her, his eyes were dark, full of emotion. "I didn't want to hurt you, Mira. I swear. I thought I could protect you by keeping the truth from you. But that was a mistake. And now, I don't know how to make it right." Mira took a step forward, her eyes never leaving his. "The truth, Ethan? Which truth? The one about my mother? Or the one about you?" His expression faltered, but only for a moment. "Both," he said quietly. "I should have told you everything from the beginning. About your mother, about what happened. But I didn't think you were ready for it. And I was wrong." Mira's pulse quickened. "I don't understand. Why did you hire me? Why did you get close to me? Was it all part of your plan?" Ethan's face tightened. No, it wasn't. I didn't plan any of this. I didn't expect to fall for you." The words hit Mira like a blow to the chest. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Ethan stepped toward her, his eyes desperate. "Your mother? She was my sister," he said softly, his voice breaking slightly. "She was my family, and she was taken from me. But I wasn't the one who hurt her, Mira. It was someone else. Someone dangerous. And when I found you, I knew there was a connection. I couldn't let you go. I couldn't just walk away from you." Mira stared at him, trying to piece the truth together in her mind. "You knew? You knew who I was?" "Yes. I knew who you were the moment I saw you. But I never wanted you to know. I didn't want to drag you into this mess. But I couldn't help myself. I wanted to protect you." She was reeling, the flood of emotions overwhelming her. Betrayal. Confusion. A part of her felt like she was drowning in it all. But something inside her began to stir. A feeling she hadn't allowed herself to feel since she first walked away. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why all the lies? Why keep me in the dark?" Ethan's eyes softened. "Because I thought I could fix it. I thought if I kept you close, I could protect you from everything that happened. But I was wrong. I should have told you everything the moment we met." Mira felt a surge of emotion, anger, sadness, and pain. But something else too. Something deeper. She realized, in that moment, that she had been holding on to all the wrong things. The lies, the betrayal, the anger. But the truth, no matter how painful, had a power all its own. And as she looked into Ethan's eyes, something inside her clicked. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Ethan," Mira said softly. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again. But I can't keep running away either." Ethan took a step toward her, his hand outstretched. But this time, Mira didn't back away. She stayed still, meeting his gaze with a quiet strength. "I don't want to lose you, Mira." "I never wanted to hurt you," Ethan said, his voice filled with regret. Mira didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, something shifted. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't holding on to the past. She was ready to move forward, whatever that looked like. With a deep breath, she stepped closer to him, feeling the weight of their shared history, but also the possibility of something new. "I'm not ready to say I forgive you," she whispered, "but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to figure this out. Together." Mira stood in Ethan's office, the weight of their conversation hanging in the air between them like a fragile thread. Her heart was still heavy, but there was a sense of clarity she hadn't felt before. She wasn't sure where this would lead, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't running. She wasn't hiding from the truth anymore. Ethan watched her closely, his face filled with the kind of vulnerability she hadn't seen before. He wasn't the powerful, untouchable billionaire she had once feared. In this moment, he was just a man. Someone who had made mistakes. Someone who had hurt her. But someone who was desperately trying to make things right. "I can't promise everything will be easy," Ethan said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm willing to try, Mira. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make up for the hurt I caused you." Mira looked at him, her thoughts swirling. She had spent so much time building walls, convincing herself that she could never trust again. But something inside her was changing. She wasn't the same woman who had walked away from him a week ago. She had grown stronger, not just from leaving, but from understanding what she truly needed. "I don't expect perfection," Mira replied softly, her eyes steady on his. "But I need honesty. No more secrets, no more lies." Ethan nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I can give you that. I'll give you the truth, even when it's hard to hear. I promise you that." Mira took a deep breath. There was still so much to figure out, so many unanswered questions. But in this moment, she realized that the future wasn't about perfection. It was about rebuilding trust, step by step. They had both made mistakes. But maybe, just maybe, they could find a way forward together. The next few weeks were filled with quiet moments and tentative steps toward healing. Ethan didn't push her. He didn't try to rush things. He simply showed up, day by day, and proved with every action that he was committed to doing better. And Mira, for the first time, allowed herself to trust, not him completely, but the possibility of them. She had learned to trust herself. That was the first step. She could handle whatever came next, whether it was building a life with Ethan or going down a different path altogether. But for now, she was willing to try again. Ethan kept his promise. He was open and vulnerable, sharing his past with her, the parts he had hidden, the reasons he had made the choices he did. The secrets about her mother were no longer a barrier between them. In time, Mira came to understand that Ethan hadn't kept them from her out of malice, but out of a desire to protect her. That didn't excuse his actions, but it allowed her to see him with a new perspective. She was also learning to see herself differently. She was no longer defined by her past, by the abandoned child, the woman searching for love and approval. She was strong, capable, and deserving of a future filled with honesty and love. As the months passed, Mira's pregnancy continued to develop, and the uncertainty that had once clouded her future began to fade. She and Ethan attended doctor's appointments together, finding comfort in each other's presence. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, and they both knew they had a long road ahead. But they were in it together. One evening, after another quiet dinner, Ethan sat beside Mira on the couch, his hand resting gently on her belly. They hadn't talked much about their future, but the comfort of just being with each other said everything they needed to hear. "I never thought I'd be here, with you," Ethan said softly, his voice filled with sincerity, "and I never thought I'd get another chance to prove myself." Mira turned to face him, her eyes warm. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Ethan, but you have to earn it." Ethan nodded, his gaze meeting hers. "And I will." They sat in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a quiet understanding, the beginning of a new chapter. The past was still there, but it didn't have to define them anymore. And when the baby arrived months later, it was a new beginning for them both. Mira wasn't just a woman who had been hurt. She was a mother, a partner, and someone who had finally learned to trust herself. She and Ethan faced the challenges of parenthood side by side, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. A year later, standing in their home, Mira looked out the window at the life they were building together. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over everything. It felt like the world was finally at peace, as if all the chaos had led them to this moment of stillness. "Mira," Ethan called from behind her. She turned to face him, a soft smile playing on her lips. He was holding their baby daughter in his arms, looking at her with a love that still took her breath away. She had never imagined a life like this. But here she was, surrounded by love, by the family she had always longed for. "You're happy?" Ethan asked, his voice uncertain but hopeful. Mira smiled, walking toward him, her heart full. "I am. I'm happy." She took their daughter from his arms and held her close, feeling the warmth of their little family. "I never thought I could get here," she said softly, looking at Ethan. "But I think we've both found a way forward." Ethan stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We have. Together." And for the first time, Mira believed it. They had made it through the darkness, and now there was nothing left but light. Do you think Mira and Ethan's relationship will continue to grow stronger? Or do you think there are still challenges ahead for them? If you're still hooked, hit subscribe for more stories like this. Stay tuned for the next adventure.